Good morning, everybody. This is Football Talk. I'm your host, Bo, and we're going to go over the Wednesday wrap up, talk about everything that happened this last weekend in the NFL. So, first, we'll start off with that Raiders Rams game, and it was a bad Thursday night game, like you'd kind of expect out of the Thursday night games this season. But one thing that was the end of the game was fun to watch. You had Baker being on the team for 2 seconds, coming in, getting it done, having that game-winning drive at the end. You couldn't have asked for a better scenario. So now you know that he's got the starting job the rest of the way, but then you have to start to wonder, was he good because everything was off schedule? And if that's the case, is that sustainable over a few games? Obviously they still have a ton of injuries on the team, so it's not like they're going anywhere anyway, but this could be the best shot for Baker to try and land somewhere this next season. He's only under the contract until the end of this year, so this is his chance to get some tape that isn't terrible out there. But probably the biggest failing from that game is the Raiders. They had the lead, they looked decent, and losing this game, all but officially ends their quest to get into the playoffs. I think mathematically still possible, but it's not really possible. So kind of fun to see the end of the game with Baker coming in and getting that win, but it was a game that you knew going into it wasn't going to be a great game. Neither team had a real shot at any kind of playoff aspirations. So it was entertaining to watch, but wasn't a game that really mattered at this point in the season. Then you got the Hawks game where, man, the Seahawks really needed that one. They have a kind of a rougher end to their season. They got a couple of teams that are pretty solid, so it was unfortunate for them to drop a game to the Panthers. Panthers kind of played the upset card there, but the biggest takeaway for the Seahawks is their inability to stop the run. So even if they make it to the playoffs, I don't know that they're going to be able to really do anything once they get there, because the teams they're going to play are going to have a decent running game. And realistically, since they played the Giants, where they were able to shut Barkley down, the next 4 weeks, they've given up at a minimum 150 yards plus, and a couple of games in there, they were closing in on, giving up almost 300 yards to the opposing team. And two of those, their star running backs were over 200 yards. So their ability to stop the run, although has been bad all season, seems to be getting worse. And at this point, they've given up the second most yards, and the only team that's given up more yards is only by 70, and that's the Texans. So not exactly company that you want to be in. And, unfortunately, that's where they're at. They still have an offense that scores points, but if you can't stop the run, there's not a lot you're going to do, especially if you do make it to the playoffs. At this point, getting into the playoffs might become a little bit more challenging with, where their record is sitting, and then coming up tomorrow night against San Fran, and then they still have the Chiefs. So, and then they wrap up the season with LA, and with Baker in there now, who knows? Like, is he enough of a spark? So I had the Seahawks as a 7-win team before the season. They've achieved that, but there's no way, if you're under 500, you're getting into the playoffs this year. So if they have any chance to make the playoffs, they pretty much have to win out. And then the Panthers are, they're the Panthers. They're done for the year, basically. So that one, this game against the Niners is going to be a huge game for the Seahawks if they have any hope to keep pace. Obviously, that game isn't going to be for the division anymore, but what it will be is potentially getting into the playoffs because you have the Giants and Washington playing each other this week, and whoever loses that game, if the Seahawks win, will be, you know, out of the playoffs, out of the playoff picture for this week, and that would put the Seahawks back in at the 7th seed. So this is a huge game for the Hawks. Not sure that they're able to pull that one off, but it would be a huge game. And then, of course, you got Arizona playing the Pats on Monday night. So I picked Arizona in this game. I thought they were going to be able to do something despite the fact that they haven't really won anything at home this year. But, you know, the Patriots just aren't a great team. They have a good defense, but offensively, they do a lot of just kind of weird, just it's a strange looking offense. They really don't push the ball. Most of their passes are at or behind the line of scrimmage, so it's just kind of it's a strange layout. So I thought Arizona was going to be able to get it done. Now, obviously, losing Kyler for the year, and I haven't heard the extent of the injury yet. It looked like it was probably an ACL tear, which means he's going to probably end up missing, you know, probably almost half of next season, I would think. So the good thing for them is they have probably the most serviceable backup in Colt McCoy, and he's still under contract. So they'll probably be okay. But, you know, moving forward, it's going to be interesting to see how they start next season. Obviously, this season is basically done with McCoy. Well, I mean, record-wise, it is done. But even if they were in the mix, if Colt McCoy is your guy, I don't know that I don't know that you win any playoff games if you were able to get there. But, you know, at this point, their season is officially over. And if he misses much of next season, tough to see where they end up, because the Seahawks also have a bunch of draft picks. They have a lot of guys that'll be in their second year next year. So the Seahawks on their rebuild is actually really quick. And, you know, all of a sudden that division starts to get harder again. The Lions keep surprising people, going 5-1 in the last 6. And, you know, they're kind of sneaky, you know, getting into that potential playoff picture. Obviously, they basically have to win out to do it. But what the Lions can do is they can play spoiler to everybody. And at this point, because they've gone 5-6, you know, nobody's excited about going up against Detroit, which is definitely a different story than how we started the season, where you were looking at Detroit as, yeah, they can put up points, but they can't stop anything. And they're starting to see some life out of that defense, and the offense is getting back to scoring all those points. They had that little lull in the middle of the season where they didn't quite hit the point totals that they had early in the year, but they're pretty much back to that form of, you know, really putting points up. So they're going to be fun to watch. You almost kind of hope for them to be able to sneak into the playoffs, because they could do some damage in there the way they're playing ball right now. The the Niners absolutely beat down the Bucks. That running game for the Bucks looked like it had all year, and San Fran looks tough. Purdy came out and balled out. He looks like he's being able to fill those Garoppolo shoes fairly well. And so you start to wonder if that affects Jimmy G's, you know, potential team landing spots for next season. Obviously, the injury doesn't help, but you also run into a scenario where if Purdy does really well down the stretch here, they get into the playoffs and Jimmy G is available for the, say, championship game, do you pull the trigger and put Jimmy G in? I think you do, just from an experience standpoint. But, you know, if the kid is balling out, there's definitely going to be an argument on, you know, do you stick with the hot hand? Plus, you have an organization that isn't in love with Jimmy anyway. That's why they keep trying to shop him and get him out of town. So do they want to see what Purdy can do? And then, you know, you have the real question, if he does well, and gets to that championship game and makes it competitive, or maybe even gets into the Super Bowl and makes it competitive, then you have a real question: is Lance your guy or is Purdy your guy? So if you have Purdy, who they were able to seemingly open the playbook up even more than they did for Jimmy G or Trey Lance, now all of a sudden you have a very real quarterback controversy if Purdy gets in there. If he plays well down the stretch and then, gets to that championship game or better, it'd be real interesting to see how that starting quarterback room really becomes a little bit convoluted, right? So the Bucks, on the other hand, they're winning that division, but that's a division that doesn't. Well, we'll put it this way: once you make it to the playoffs, that is the team you want to play in in that first round. I don't think you want to go up against the Vikings, the Eagles. I don't think you want any of those. I don't even think you realistically want the Niners in the first round. But I guess you wouldn't have the Eagles first round, but you wouldn't want the Cowboys. So yeah, I don't know if you're getting in as a wild card. I think since you're going to play a division winner, you definitely want to be playing probably the Bucks. So you got the Chargers on Sunday Night Football there. And, they get it done at home. I really didn't think they were going to. I was expecting a little bit more out of Miami, but, Tua, they held him to just 10 of 28 for 145 yards. I mean, that is terrible statistically, especially with the weapons they have around them. So you got to give a ton of credit to that Chargers defense. They really did some work against them. Obviously, nobody was running the ball effectively. The Chargers and the Dolphins both have a bottom 4 rushing attack. So you weren't expecting big things out of the running game. You probably were expecting something out of the running game, but neither one of them got anything going. And of course, Herbert, he had quite a day. It was 39 for 51 for 367 yards and a tug. So, I mean, everything about that game, the Chargers were solid. They were absolutely dominating that game. The score was closer than I think that game kind of really was. But yeah, like I said, neither team can run the ball. So Miami is 29th rushing, and the Chargers are 31st in rushing. And then, of course, when you compare that to their passing attack, it's second and third respectively. So it's neither one of these teams going into the playoffs. They're going to have to figure some running game out, because if the passing game gets shut down, they don't have something they can fall back on. So they got a few weeks to figure something out, but they're going to need some semblance of a rushing attack if they have any hopes to do anything in the playoffs. But we'll see. We'll see if their game can evolve. But if it doesn't, either one of these teams could easily be one and done in the playoffs, despite having, impressive offensive passing statistics. The Broncos, they continue to slide. They finally had their best scoring day. The downside to it is they came up against the Chiefs, who can more or less score at will. And the fact that KC was able to put up 21 in the second quarter was just too much for the Broncos to overcome. And of course, now you have Wilson out with, in concussion protocol. So at this point, your season is officially over. I have to imagine that they're just going to go ahead and sit Wilson and see what Rippon has. He was 50% throwing for a touchdown and an interception. Obviously a very small sample size, but I mean, you might as well see what the kid has. The season's over. No point in rushing Wilson back at this point. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do. I have to imagine that Wilson could potentially be done for the season, though. Let's see. Oh, Titans. The Titans still lead the South there, um, but the Jags collect a win off them. This is the AFC version of the team you want to see in the playoffs if you are going in as a wild card. The Titans have dropped their last three. Yeah, they lost three in a row, and the Jags aren't any better. They're in striking distance to still put up a fight for this division, but over their last three, they're 1-2, so not exactly making a hard push to really battle for it. Oh, sorry, I think they're 2-2 over their last four. But in any event, it not exactly any kind of scary numbers coming out of that division. So they'll be the team that you want in that first round. You don't necessarily want to go against the heaviest hitters in the playoffs in the wild card round, and save that for a championship game or at least a divisional game. And then, of course, you got the Eagles, who just continued to roll and beat up on the Giants. So now you're starting to look at, does the Giants end up missing the playoffs? Obviously, if you can shut down the run game, Daniel Jones is not the guy that's going to, put the team on his back and go win a game for you. If you can get in his face, he really becomes a little less accurate. So I think at this point, you got the Giants really, really starting to fade, going 0-3-1 over their last four. And of course, they have the Commanders again this week. So if they drop that game, they potentially could end up on the outside looking in of the playoff picture. And then, of course, on the Eagles side, they have an easier schedule to finish the season. I think their only real hard game is they got Dallas one more time. But if they can win out, or, even if they end up losing to Dallas, you start to think that Jalen Hurts will end up being your league MVP, even though Mahomes does have a better statistical year. He has almost 1,000 more passing yards and more touchdowns. But the MVP is a voting award. It's not a statistic award. And I think if the Eagles end up going, 15-2, 16-1, there's a really good shot that Jalen Hurts ends up as your league MVP. And I mean, rightfully so. They do have amazing talent all the way across the roster, though. So because it's a voting thing, it's how people feel the day they vote. And so I don't know that he realistically is your league MVP, but there is a really high chance that he wins it if they basically win out. And of course, you got the Cowboys, who, I mean, they must have been overlooking the Texans, because the Texans came in and almost dispatched them. They didn't look great, especially against a team that is really bad. So you start to worry a little bit about what the Cowboys are going to do, especially as you're looking to get into the playoffs. But it is December Dallas football, and they're not great historically. So it's this week will be really interesting to watch, because if they play similar to how they played the Texans, they could catch an L. And then the Ravens Steelers, that was an ugly game. You knew it was going to be. Realistically, this was a game that I took the Steelers in just because the Ravens D has been terrible. Obviously, Lamar is out. But that Ravens D stepped up and ended up with 3 takeaways. And ultimately, that became the difference in a really tight game. But, it's that's another division where they're kind of the Ravens don't look sharp, and the Bengals are right there. So, if they don't figure some things out, again, they did get the win, but it wasn't a good looking win. And so, but a win's a win, right? A win's a win. That being said, if they don't get some things kind of worked out, not only could they end up giving the Bengals that division, they could also end up on the outside looking in the playoff picture. So lots of stuff to look at. Games are becoming far more important as we start to wrap up the season. Be sure to like, subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow morning, not only for our weekly picks, but also going to do a special segment for Thursday Night Football. Obviously I am a Hawks fan, and Gary, who I do the NFC roundtable with, is going to meet up with me, and we're going to talk a little Seahawks versus Niners Thursday Night Football. Huge game for the Hawks, still an important game for the Niners, obviously for, tons of reasons, but we'll get more into that tomorrow morning. And then we have Hawk Talk on Friday morning. So anyway, like, subscribe. See y'all tomorrow.